How does auto white balance work? Auto white balance works by trying to assess an entire scene and figure it out in terms of averaging it out to a neutral gray. What is a neutral gray? This is misunderstood by a lot of people. What is a neutral color when we're talking about photography and graphic arts, etc.? A neutral color means that there is a perfect black, white, or gray. There is no tinge of any shade of color in that whatsoever. So when we're talking about like red, green, and blue, if you have equal amounts of red, green, and blue, whether it's 0%, we'll just talk about percentages to make it easy. 0% red, green, and blue would be black. That means there's no light whatsoever. Okay, so in that understanding, black is not actually a color at all. It's the absence of all color. If I increased that though to 1% red, green, and blue, now there is a little bit of color in there, right? But it's not an actual tint of color. It's the darkest gray that you can possibly get before getting to black, 1% of each one of them. If you go to 50% red, green, and blue, that's going to be a pure gray, a 50% gray. And if you go to 100% red, green, and blue, that's going to be a pure white. Okay? So, white is the presence of all colors equally. Black is the absence of all colors, 0%. And everything in between is a shade of gray. Okay, if I had, let's say, 50% red, 50% green, and 51% blue, that is not a neutral color because it's going to have that 1% tinge of blue to it. So it's not a perfectly neutral gray anymore. All right, so we have to understand black, white, and gray, true black, white, and gray are actual neutral colors. So your white balance setting is trying to average out this scene and get it to basically that neutral gray. Now, we're not talking about like actual black and white here. What it's just trying to do is it's making sure that like if there is any neutral colors in the scene, that they remain neutral. So as we look around here, like back here on my computer monitor, we got a lot of black back here. I'm not really wearing neutral too much. My watch has black on it. But as long as it gets neutral colors correct, everything else should be pretty close to being correct also. Why can we have that assumption? Because even if human beings have a damaged cone or they have a color deficiency of some kind, we can still perceive neutral colors the same way. One thing though that can easily trick auto white balance is this type of scene, when you have multiple different light sources. If I chose to shoot this scene today with just window light, I didn't have my monitors on, I didn't have this lamp on or these other lamps back behind me, etc., then it would be much easier for my camera to figure out that, hey, there's only one light source, so I don't have to worry about anything else. In this scene that I'm in, my camera is basically just having to figure out, okay, this is the majority of the light sources falling on me, so that's what it wants to neutralize, and it's going to not worry about those back there. But you can control, let's say that you wanted that yellowish light back there to be more of a neutral, then you could take that into your own hands and you could use a custom preset in your camera. So let's talk about presets. Instead of having to guess, let's talk about presets and see exactly what they do. Every camera has a menu with certain white balance settings, and almost every camera is pretty similar. So we're going to just dive into each one of those, and you're going to notice that I'm going to show some reference images, and they're going to have a gray card in them. And reference back to what I was just talking about with neutral colors. The whole reason we use, as photographers, we use gray cards or like an X-Rite color checker or something like that, is we want to make sure that we have a neutral in every image, or at least images that we're basing our initial assumptions off of, because again, if you were shooting an image of me right now, I don't really have a lot of neutral in my, my shirt is a little bit of a green and my tie is maroon. We need something neutral to be able to key off of. So each one of these images I'm going to show you is going to show a side-by-side comparison of if you shot it in auto white balance versus if you shot it with the preset under which would make most sense for that scene. So the first one we'll start with is going to be daylight. The daylight setting, that's a little bit tricky because you might think, well, if I'm shooting outside and it's not nighttime, it's always daylight, so why wouldn't I just shoot the daylight setting every time I'm outside? So the reason for that is what the daylight or sunny setting really means is if you're kind of just in broad daylight. There's no shade. The sun isn't setting or rising, it's kind of just right up above you, kind of the middle of the day type of a setting. And it's going to be, set for like kind of strong sunlight. Basically what it's trying to do is it's trying to balance for something in the range of like 5,000 to 6,000 Kelvin. Something that's going to be pretty close to white light. So your camera, if you tell it to shoot in daylight, it's going to assume that the color temperature in the scene is somewhere around 5,000 to 6,000 Kelvin. That's not exactly the range, but it's somewhere in that range, okay? So if you're shooting in daylight with just the auto white balance setting, like why would we even do this, right? If you're shooting with the auto white balance setting and you find that it's just not quite right, then maybe switch over to daylight and see what you get. So next, let's talk about the cloudy setting. So obviously the cloudy setting would be if it's kind of an overcast day. There's clouds in front of the sun, so you're not getting direct sunlight. Whenever clouds obscure the sun, the color temperature typically cools off a little bit. And it's kind of easy to think about it in that way because if you think about if you're in like midday sun, it's hot, so it's a little warmer. But if you have clouds in front of the sky or in front of the sun, then it cools down a little bit. So you can think of it as getting cooler in color temperature also. Not much cooler, okay? If it's midday, again, but you're outside shooting and the clouds keep coming and going, let's say, and you're using auto white balance and it's a little off, but you can tell that there's going to be a good amount of cloud cover coming in. Maybe switch over to cloudy and you might get more accurate results in that setting. Basically, it's trying to correct for color temperature somewhere around the 6,000, 6,500 Kelvin range. That's getting a little bit cooler. So it's going to add in, a little bit of the warmer tones to try and balance out how cool it's getting as the cloudiness creates more of a blue or cool setting. The next one is shade. So again, you might be a little confused there because when it's cloudy, it kind of emulates shade a little bit. But remember that if you're actually in shade, that's usually going to be darker than just cloudy skies, right? And so if you're in shade, that's usually going to cool the color temperature down even more to somewhere around 7,000, maybe 7,500 Kelvin. So, if you are, let's say it's a really sunny day, a really bright day, and the sun is just so bright that you don't want to shoot in the midday sun, so you try and find a tree or a building and you shoot in shade, then you might want to use the shade setting for auto white balance, especially if, let's say you're shooting down an alley or something and you've got the building providing some shade, but back in the distance you can see a lot of broad sunlight. You don't want the auto white balance to get confused with the sunlight in the background and try to balance it for it, because it's a totally different color temperature than what you're shooting your subject in shade. So you might set shade for that specific setting to get a more accurate color temperature. Okay, we're going to go on the opposite side of the spectrum now, and we're going to go down to tungsten or incandescent light. So, when I was a kid and we had just regular light bulbs, we didn't have CFL bulbs or LED, etc. Every light bulb inside of a person's house was an incandescent or a tungsten bulb. Now, when you go to the store, you notice you can buy ones that say cool white or daylight or something like that, or cool blue. And so what we're really talking about here when we talk about tungsten and incandescent, what most people think about is lamplight, something like this, that's very kind of warm, very yellow, orangish. So typically when you're going to set the tungsten setting, that is trying to combat a color temperature that's way down in like the 3000 Kelvin range, very warm color temperature. And that again is typically going to be like inside of a home. That's where we mostly see tungsten and incandescent bulbs, is inside of a home, maybe inside of a business, something like that, where it might look very yellow or warm, but what it's going to do, your camera, if you take that setting, it's going to add blue to try to balance out how warm that color is with the coolness of the blue to get it to be a neutral color so that everything isn't like super yellow or super orange or warm in that setting. Let's talk about fluorescent setting. This is the trickiest one by far, and the one that probably has the most fluctuation in how well it's going to work. The reason for this is, we see fluorescent lights a lot. Obviously in businesses, we see a lot of fluorescent lighting. The problem with fluorescent lighting is the way a fluorescent light tube works is it is basically using a gas inside of it to create the illumination or the radiation, and it isn't accurate from 1 millisecond to the next. So it doesn't stay a constant perfect color temperature. It kind of has spikes, and it's going to go from one color temperature to the next. It's not a drastic change, okay? It's not like 1 second it's blue, 1 second it's yellow, but it is kind of changing just a little bit on a consistent basis. So your camera, especially auto white balance, can be tricked pretty easy by fluorescent. And if you sit there, and this is an experiment you could do yourself, just take a gray card and go under fluorescent lighting and just sit there and take 20 or 30 shots of it. You don't even have to wait very long. You can just set it on continuous and just boom, 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 boom. If you take those images into Photoshop or an image editing program and you look at the color of the gray on those images from one to the next, in theory they should be the same, right? But they won't be. You'll have different readings from not each one of them, but you'll have inconsistent readings across the board. And that's because that color temperature is just slightly changing constantly. So can we get perfect images under fluorescent lights? Well, yeah. Even if our camera doesn't capture it perfectly, we can edit it in post and get it pretty close. Is it going to be something that's going to completely ruin your images? No. Most trained eyes will catch it, but most amateur eyes won't see a huge difference.